So in this video, we're going to learn how to factor a polynomial by grouping. So this method is going to be used today on a 4-term polynomial. You'll see a little bit later that you can also use this to factor a trinomial, but today we're just going to focus on a 4-term or quartic polynomial. So here's our polynomial. So in this method, you want to break it up into 2 binomials. So you're just going to concentrate on the first 2 terms, 20x to the third minus 12x squared. You're going to do what you did in the previous video where you're just going to look at it and you're going to say, what is the greatest common factor? Well, let's look at the numbers first, 20 and 12. Well, I know I can take out a 2, but again, I want to take out the greatest common factor, so it looks like I can take out a 4. Then I want to look at the variables. I have x to the third and x squared, so the largest variable I could take out would be an x squared. So my greatest common factor would be 4x squared. I'm going to divide those terms by my 4x squared. Again, just like before, I'm going to go parentheses and then divide it out. So 20x to the third divided by 4x squared will give me a 5x. I'm going to do the same thing for the next term. I'm going to divide it by 4x squared, and I'll get a minus 3. Now that I've done that, I'm going to move on to the other 2 terms. This sign in between is a negative sign, so I'm going to put a negative sign in between there. Now I have to find my greatest common factor between 15x and 9. Well, it looks to me they are both divisible by 3. And I only have an x, the 9 doesn't have an x, so there's no variables that I can factor out. So if I divide the first term by 3, I will get a 5x. And if I divide the second term by 3, I will get also get a 3. 9 divided by 3 is 3. But I have to be careful of my sign because I took out a negative 3, and this is a positive 9. If you remember, a negative times a negative would give me a positive, so I need to put a negative sign there. If you take a look at what we have here, you'll notice that these 2 parentheses are exactly the same. This has to be true, or this particular polynomial is not factorable by grouping, and not everything is. So if these are not exactly the same and your instructions are to factor by grouping, go back and see if you did something wrong. So what this tells you is the 2 terms that you factored out, the 4x squared and the minus 3, get put together for your first term, and then this 5x minus 3 that you factored out would be your second term. So this here is fully factored. So when you take that 4-term polynomial, 20x to the third minus 12x squared minus 15x plus 9, and factor it, you will get 4x squared minus 3 times 5x minus 3. Now, if you wanted to, you could double distribute and work backwards and make sure you get the original polynomial. That would be a way that you could check your answer. Let's try another one. So here we go. Here's 4-term polynomial. First thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the first 2 terms and say, what is the greatest common factor? Well, I have 6 and a 9, so it looks like I can take out a 3. And I have x to the third and x squared, so it looks like I can take out an x squared. I'm going to divide each of these terms by my greatest common factor. And when I do that, my first term becomes 2x. And when I divide the second one, it will be a minus 3. I'm going to look at the second 2 terms. This time I have a plus sign, so this will be plus in between the 2. And I have a 4x and a 6, so it looks like I can take out a 2, but no variables. When I do that and divide it out by 2, I'll get a 2x minus 3. Again, now this has to be a minus 3 because if I distribute this 2 times minus 3 would be a minus 6, which is what I have here. Again, these 2 parentheses are exactly the same, which has to happen, or you've done something wrong. The things that you took out are your 2 greatest common factors, get put together for your first factor, and then you're going to bring down the 2x minus 3 for your second factor. And then this here is fully factored. This can be a little tricky, and there's one more trick that I have to show you on this one. So let's do one more. So I have 7x to the third minus 4x squared minus 7x plus 4. I'm going to concentrate on just the first two terms. But if I look at 7 and 4, I don't see any greatest common factor for those numbers. So I can't take out a greatest common factor there besides 1. But I have x to the third and x squared. I can take out an x squared. So I can take out a 1x squared, or I can just write it as x squared. I'm going to do the same thing as I did before. I'm going to divide that out. So if I divide 7x to the third by x squared, I'm going to get a 7x. And if I divide negative 4x squared by x squared, I'm going to get a minus 4. I'm going to look at the next two terms. This here is a subtraction sign, so it's going to be a subtraction sign in between. But now the only thing I can take out is a 1, because we said there's no greatest common factor between 7 and 4, and the 4 doesn't have a variable. But I have to put something in that spot, even if it is a 1. So I'm going to factor out a 1, which means I'll divide the first term by 1, which will give me a 7x. I'll divide the second term by 1, which will give me a 4. And again, if I'm going to distribute this negative sign and I want a positive sign, a negative times a negative will be a positive, so I have to put a negative sign in there. Once again, these two are exactly the same, which has to happen. And so the two greatest common factors I took out, I will put together. And then the 7x minus 4 is my other factor. But this should look familiar to you. If you remember from our previous discussion, x squared minus 1 is what we call the difference of a perfect square. X squared is a perfect square. 1 is a perfect square, and there is a subtraction sign in between. So this can be factored into its two conjugate pairs. So I know that x plus 1 times x minus 1 multiplied together will give me x squared minus 1. So I can factor this further and then just bring down the 7x minus 4. So now this here would be my final answer, fully factored. So why don't you try some on your own and let us know if you have any questions.